Welcome to the Georgia Vote. Our newsmaker this week is Atlanta NAACP President Gerald Griggs. Gerald, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate you for being in studio.
Thank you for having me, Faith. It's great.
So this week we are commemorating Juneteenth. I want to ask you, being in Atlanta, the heart of the civil rights movement, we know that Juneteenth commemorates a day that happened in Galveston, Texas, when the slaves there, they finally found out that they were free 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. But here in Atlanta, how is that legacy of Juneteenth impacting us here in Georgia?
I think given the history of this city, rising from the Phoenix after the Civil War, of course, the civil rights movement, it impacts us in a special way because we know how important liberation is. So to find out that emancipated African Americans found out 2 years later that they were actually free, it cements the legacy and the reason to have a celebration. You know, I found out about Juneteenth when I was probably around 6 or 7, when I would go visit my uncle in Dyersburg, Tennessee. He's from Memphis. And so they were celebrating it, and I didn't fully understand why they were celebrating Juneteenth when we always celebrated Emancipation Day, which is Jubilee Day, which is 2 years before that. But once he broke it down to me and explained that, you know, General Granger came into the town and told those freed slaves that they were in fact freed, and the party that broke out, it just underscored the freedom and liberation. And I think that's what Atlanta gravitates towards, and that's why it's important for us to celebrate as well.
Now, I want to ask you about just kind of the education aspect of that, because there are still a lot of people who might not know the meaning of Juneteenth. Myself, I only found out in college. I don't even think I was taught about it in school. What is the importance of educating young people, black, white, brown, green, blue, yellow, whoever, about the history of Black America?
I think because Black history is American history, and so many times that history has been erased or not been recognized. And I think now with the federal holiday, people are starting to embrace the conversation of those lost pieces of history that are American history. If you remember, in every major event in American history, Black people have been there leading the charge or in a supportive role, and it's important to highlight that. I think Juneteenth gives us that conversation now with being a federal holiday.
I want to ask you a little bit more about Atlanta's role in the past, present, and future as we look ahead to Black history, as you said, is American history. Where have we come from, and what work still needs to be done for, well, Black Americans?
We've come a long way since we were brought over to these shores for involuntary servitude and brutalization through African chattel slavery. And so from 1619 to now, there's been a long history of struggle, of success, of setbacks, of attempts to erase. But particularly in Atlanta, you had the birthplace of civil rights. You had leaders like Julian Bond, you had leaders like John Lewis, you of course had leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King, who were integral in moving the nation forward, and they called Atlanta home. And so when you think about Sweet Auburn, you think about all of the things that happened, the Atlanta Race Massacre, where one of our most pivotal members was here and born here and you know, and dealt with that. And then, of course, W.E.B. Du Bois over at Clark Atlanta University. It's just so much rich history here with the struggle that I think it connects that continuum of justice that we have seen through Atlanta and through African American history. And so with what's happening currently today with the attempts to erase African American history, the attempts to suppress voices and votes, the attempts to attack minority-based grant programs, it's important that we take a moment to celebrate how far we've come, but how far we have to go.
And I want to ask you about those. Are there any specific programs that the Atlanta NAACP is working on right now to fight some of the things that you just talked about?
Well, we're standing shoulder to shoulder with our partners and fighting with and for the Fearless Fund to make sure that the 11th Circuit's temporary protective order is revisited so that they can actually provide grant funding. We are focused on improving economic sustainability here in Atlanta with our partnerships with the Urban League. But most importantly, we're focused on turning out to vote in 2024 to make sure that Georgia stays black, because people always talk about Georgia turned blue in 2020. No, it didn't turn blue, it turned black. And so we wanted to empower African American voters to, one, register, but two, mobilize, that we can protect our democracy and make sure those advances that my foreparents and your foreparents fought for continue to our descendants. So those are just a few of the projects. Mainly we're focused on voter mobilization right now.
I want to get back to, as you called it, turning Georgia black, but I want to ask you this first. In your opinion, what is the current state of our politics here in Georgia?
The current state of our politics are in flux. There's a lot of conversation on both the right and the left, but they're not really speaking directly to the middle. And by the middle, I mean the kitchen table issues like inflation, like funding education, reforming the criminal justice system, making sure that people have a great quality of living, which crosses all political spectrums. So there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of conversation about things that don't affect Georgia, but we're not talking about those kitchen table issues that do. Every African American family wants to provide for a great education, great health care, and a great future. They're not talking about that. Every middle class family wants those same things. We don't have to traffic in division. We can bring people together, but the first thing you have to do is recognize the humanity of every single person. That's why black people are upset that you're trying to erase history. You're trying to take away black investment. You're trying to make sure that black people are not prospering in the same way everyone else is. And that's why the state of our political conversation is in flux, because black people know how to push back in real time. We show up, we vote, we hold this country accountable to the words that are written in the Constitution for everyone.
Speaking of November, both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they are coming hard after the black vote, specifically black men. Several of them, both of them have been to Atlanta several times. Vice President Kamala Harris in Atlanta this week. When we saw President Joe Biden give his commencement speech at Morehouse, it was a plea to not just black voters, but those black men that were graduating there. Some people wrote it off as just Biden saying what he needs to say to get the black vote. Some people citing the '94 crime bill, saying that Biden doesn't care about black people. Do you think that that's true? Do you think that the Biden administration has done enough for black voters, especially black men?
I think neither candidate has done enough for black voters, specifically black men. There's a lot of rhetoric around who's the best president for black America, what people have done for black America. Let's be clear, not enough has been done. Not enough has been done to protect the vote. Not enough has been done to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which was the reason why we had the largest political and largest social protest in the history of this country in 2020. Not enough has been done to pour economic investment into the African American community. So I appreciate what the president and the former president are touting they've done for the African American community. But myself, as an African American man, as somebody who's grown up in this community for 40 years, not enough has been done. And so when we talk about the infrastructure bill, when we talk about investment in HBCUs, when we talk about protecting the vote, we need to actually see those things in real time. And so to both candidates who will come to Atlanta and speak directly to the citizens of Atlanta. Don't come for photo ops. Don't come for events at certain social gathering places. Come directly into Bankhead. Come directly into the South Side. Go down to Macon. Go to Savannah. Go to Augusta. Talk to the black vote, because whoever wins the black vote in Georgia will be the president of the United States, and we have a lot to say.
I want to ask you about former President Donald Trump. Recently, his campaign announced the Black Americans for Trump coalition in that email. And it's something that the former president has repeatedly said, that he has done more for the black community than any other president in recent history. There was a Wall Street Journal poll that came out. It polled black men in swing states. That poll showed that 30% of black men said that they would either definitely or they are thinking about voting for President Trump. It also cited a 2020 poll that showed 12% of black men voted for the former president. Can former President Trump deliver for black men in America?
That's a good question, and I trust the poll the NAACP did. And the poll the NAACP did said that 10% approved of President Trump's presidency, 10% of black people. And so I hear a lot of the rhetoric, I listen to the polls, but then I go into the community. Right now, the person that's running the best campaign in the black community is the couch. And we have to figure out how we get people more engaged by getting the candidates to talk about actual deliverables instead of rhetoric. Let's be clear, Donald Trump did not do enough for the African American community for him to say he's the greatest president for the African American community. The greatest president for the African American community would probably be Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, of course Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and then Lyndon Baines Johnson, just to start. And then of course you have President Barack Obama. During President Trump's administration, we had African Americans being called SOBs. We had all kinds of police violence going forth while he was clearing people out to take a photo out. We had people telling us to inject bleach and UV rays under the skin while we saw a pandemic of both COVID-19 and racism 1619. And then we saw in a neighborhood in Scintilla Shores 2 flags that were flying when Ahmaud Arbery was brutally lynched. One was a Confederate flag and the other was the flag of a certain political candidate. And then we had somebody call into Georgia and say that black people didn't vote and they needed to find 11,000 votes. So respectfully, I push back on whether or not he's the greatest president for black people. He still has the opportunity. Of course, as the NAACP, we're nonpartisan, so we're gonna hold anybody accountable. If he wants to talk about real deliverables and not tennis shoes, we're willing to listen. But until he does that in a forum that's not controlled, like the black church in Detroit that he went to, which was not filled with African Americans, come down to a black church down here and let's have a real conversation about what you can do for black people.
I want to talk to you, just your message to voters. Like you said, NAACP, not a partisan group. What is your message to voters as we look ahead to November?
Our message to voters is black voters still matter, that we will determine this election, that policies and initiatives need to speak to where we're going and not where we've come from, and that you need to move us forward through energy of hope, consistency, and listening. The key is to listen to the people, not to talk at the people. A lot of African Americans are very disturbed by what they see in our politics. They're disturbed by the rise in police violence. They're disturbed by the rise in white supremacy rhetoric and talking points and racism, and they want to see improvements in our community that are sustainable. So investment in African American communities, investment in protecting the vote, not talking about Project 2025 and dismantling all of these historic institutions in our country, like the Justice Department, like the Department of Education, fully funding the Department of Education. Those are just a few of the things that they want to talk about, but most importantly is the cost of living. Inflation has to be reduced and investment has to happen, and we have to focus on what's real in our community. Those things are real.
Mr. Griggs, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.